Welcome to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media, where we are tracking the wild changes in this media age. I'm Max Tawney, media editor at Semaphore, and with me, as always, of course, is our editor-in-chief, Ben Smith.
Hi, Max.
This week, we're talking to another editor, and that is Tina Brown. Tina, of course, is the iconic former top editor of The New Yorker and Vanity Fair and chronicler of the British royal family. And she is now writing an increasingly popular Substack called Fresh Hell. We'll ask her about how her own trajectory reflects the kind of changing media landscape, whether magazines still matter, and who is advising Harry and Meghan behind the scenes.
Yeah, we should also try to get some story assignments out of her. She is legendarily had her sort of finger on the pulse for her whole career.
Well, we'll ask her to do Ben's job for him and more right after the break. Back in kind of the peak magazine, the heyday of magazines, people would describe the editors-in-chief as imperial editors, kind of lording over the realm of writers, being able to kind of dispense cultural wisdom and being able to direct the conversation in ways just with on their impulses and whims. Would you describe yourself? You're an editor-in-chief. Would you describe yourself as an imperial editor?
No, that's the dream. Now we're just herding cats all day. Both in terms of, I think, a world where writers and journalists have much more kind of individual power, and then also, no one publication can really shape the culture the way these old magazines used to.
Well, one imperial editor who shaped the culture at various different magazines, whether it was serving as editor-in-chief of The New Yorker or of Vanity Fair or of the short-lived Talk magazine, was, of course, Tina Brown, maybe like the dictionary definition of an imperial editor, at this point. I kind of caught the very, very tail end of that. I feel like I started in magazines just as Graydon Carter was kind of wrapping up his time at Vanity Fair, but you were around in New York. You were starting to be around in New York at the time when there were still imperial editors lording over their realms. Who is Tina? Give us a little bit of her background.
Yeah, I mean, Tina was just a phenom at a moment when it was like big news who was going to be the editor of these publications. There were huge, powerful jobs with hugely successful businesses around them, dispensing money as well as all those other things. And she was a kind of upstart British editor who'd run Tatler, which you may not be a big reader of. I was not, and had arrived in 1984 to take over and really revive and create what we know as Vanity Fair, which was this celebrity-focused kind of buzz machine that took the culture by storm. And then the real scandal was in 1992 when Cy Newhouse, who had run The New Yorker, which, was kind of run as like a library where everybody spoke to each other in whispers, took over The New Yorker, and they stopped publishing, 40,000 word articles about obscure birds, started writing more about politics, about celebrities. It was a scandal at the time. I think in the end, I think David Remnick, the current editor, would say this too. She created the sort of the modern New Yorker and laid the groundwork for its future success. And then she jumped in 1998, probably the last year in which this possibly sounded like a good idea for various reasons, with Harvey Weinstein to create a magazine called Talk, which was going to merge the kind of highbrow New Yorker Vanity Fair stuff with a kind of more lowbrow zeitgeisty celebrity thing, and that did not work, but had a legendary party on Liberty Island, which they rented out because that's how magazines worked back then. But she never got out of the game. She started the Daily Beast in 2008. She's also probably the leading chronicler of the royals, just on the side. Her book, Vanity Fair Diary, is amazing, but she also has a big book called The Diana Chronicles, if you're into that stuff. And now she has a Substack that you sort of have to read called Fresh Hell, because that's the only thing left to do is to have a Substack.
Is that, hearing the kind of long resume and having it end and now she has a Substack with your cousin and everybody on Twitter.
Yeah.
And, is that sad? Is it a sign of the times? Is it actually kind of good in the sense that, does it connote the fact that quality on these platforms has actually gone up significantly, so much so that the point that the former editor of The New Yorker feels like it's a worthy place to kind of put stuff? What do you make of that?
It's funny, when I said it, it did sort of sound sad, but I didn't mean it that way. Like, I'm thrilled that she has a Substack, and there is something about this moment in which it's so individualized, right? Like, you want to know what Tina Brown thinks, and you don't want it filtered through a publication and a brand. Although, you gather from her Substack that she misses the days when she could dispatch great writers halfway around the world to, on a whim, to chase some whisper, which you cannot do on Substack. But I think that's sort of what I want to talk to her about, is that that funny arc from leading the most powerful institutions in media to, you know, being one voice among a million on this platform.
While Tina's waiting for us, let's bring her on.
Thank you so much for joining us, Tina.
I'm thrilled to be with you, really.
We introduced you by talking about your genuinely legendary magazine career, chronicled in Vanity Fair Diaries and elsewhere, and Max's sort of pity for me that I don't get to live in the era of the kind of imperial editor. But there is something about how that kind of huge role of an editor directing people, directing a publication, directing the Zeitgeist has sort of collapsed into everyone's an individual voice. And I'm curious, sort of how you're finding that.
And every business model is a tin cup, right? there is that too. Well, actually, I mean, I've sort of moved on, I mean, I suppose you could say that I was the early adopter because, Talk Magazine kind of collapsed at the beginning of the 2000s. So I went on my odyssey and kind of found my own life and changed my ways and did other things. So actually, I'm fine with it. I mean, I'm not sitting here yearning, for a town car to take me to the Four Seasons for lunch. I don't even have lunch anymore. I mean, I can't even remember the last time I had lunch because I'm always working through it. There is also something quite liberating about this time. I mean, I love having my Substack. It's mine. I love the statistics, for instance, because like at Condé Nast, they almost like hid you from the figures. It was one of the most ridiculous things in the world. You had no idea sort of what was going on in the company. You were just somebody who sort of churned out your magazine. Great luxury in some ways, but I like kind of being a sort of freelance producer of my own content. I mean, maybe I'm just at a time in my life when I'm fine with that. I don't know how I'd feel if I was younger. My daughter is in her 30s and she just feels like, oh my God, when she reads the Vanity Fair Diaries, it's like she doesn't lust for that kind of big budget stuff, but she lusts for the action. She lusts for the magazine office, the fun of having an entity where people would come in and out, and there was it was an action show, and it was a real kind of, it was a lot of fun those days. I must say, we had a lot of fun.
I mean, I think the thing those magazines could do, and that maybe you more than anybody could do, was capture and direct the zeitgeist. To sort of say, this is what's happening in the country. Can anyone do that anymore?
Well, I miss that. I mean, because as I'm only kind of dependent on myself, I can't, I can't sort of direct the troops to go out and find it all, because there's so many great stories now that, I mean, it's a fire hose of incredible stories now. I mean, too many great stories now. So you do miss that, of being able to kind of match the story with what's happening, and that's what I miss. I guess it's that matching. It's thinking that writer should be doing that story now, So yeah, I do miss that. But, I mean, time changes. I mean, we're in such a transitional era. I mean, I tend to feel that this is still very much the in-between, that there is still something coming that might be able to combine some of those things. I mean, there's a lot of very good stuff happening. I mean, look at all the stuff you're doing, and Semaphore and Puck and, and Substack. I mean, there is stuff happening. I mean, do these things just grow and explode and become the new big, huge things? They might. Let's hope so.
Do they reconglomerate, basically, is what you're suggesting, and become big things with imperial editors who can boss people around again?
Possibly. You kind of wonder whether it could happen, right? I mean, I can imagine, Semaphore will rule the world. I mean, you'll be sitting there. One of the funniest things is when, for about 10 minutes, as you know, we owned Newsweek when I was at the Daily Beast, and then we saw all these figures for the sale of Newsweek, and there were things, it was like looking at, that great scene in the Titanic when it goes from sort of the dancing ballroom into the wreck, if you know what I mean, and looking at the sort of descriptions of the jobs in that era, it was things like, office of the executive of the, office of the president, 3 people. So you can imagine this kind of publisher sitting, with an office with 3 people sitting outside. It was like, office of the editor-in-chief, executive assistant, and assistant to the executive assistant of the editor-in-chief. And you were thinking like, oh my God. I mean, it was like the State Department. It was like the State Department. Then there was the executive dining room. Oh my God. I mean, that must have been a really incredible period, was all I can say.
So obviously, there's no executive dining room for Substack writers or editors, but the writing in Fresh Hell is really fun and it really pops. But the thing that I feel sometimes kind of reading it is I'm like, oh man, I wish that I could read this in this like beautiful magazine-y format, like the old school kind of Vanity Fair format. There is something about Substack that in some cases like flattens, your Substack looks similar to, another Substack that I've read, right? And part of that is kind of purposeful and it's good. And it means that, you can start something tomorrow and it looks really great and really professional, but there is a little bit of a uniformity. Do you miss kind of the aesthetics?
Terribly, yeah, I know. I mean, when I was actually sort of getting the Substack ready, I was trying to do all these design things and constantly being told, you can't do that. This is the format, it's the format. So I think the thing I do miss about magazines is what I think of as the hierarchy of excitement, right? Where you can decide how big to make something look. So you're never really in control of this is important, which is what you could do in a magazine. And also just the fun of looking through pictures, which is always my biggest, the thing I love most in the world, looking through pictures and thinking, that's a double page spread, I was actually yesterday, I'm doing this big conference in London called the Truth Tellers Summit, which is my thing I do for my husband's, who was a great crusading editor, Harry Evans, for his legacy. And we do a Reuters, photojournalism exhibit. And it was so fun to be kind of looking through those pictures. And there was just one great picture of this kind of girl in a ball dress sort of in the ruins in Gaza. And it was such a fantastic picture. I mean, it was like, it just had double page spread all over it, but it's sadly, I mean, and I feel mostly about this for the visual people. I mean, there is no way to really get that kind of theatrical effect anymore for photographs. It's very kind of, here's a picture, here's a picture, here's a picture. So yeah, I do miss that. And, but I mean, the sad thing is, I mean, do readers miss it? I don't know. I mean, we've all just become such kind of, sort of scavengers of info, as it were. We just sort of, we see it on our phone. We're not thinking about the aesthetics. We're not missing that pleasure. But I miss that pleasure.
I think we're in some ways overwhelmed. We're a bit spoiled, right? We get instant, if that Gaza photo, is out there, we get instant access to it on social media, right? We get it on Twitter, on Instagram, and we're exposed to that in a feed among many other, amazing images and obviously plenty of garbage as well. But I feel like it de-emphasizes kind of the importance of images.
I mean, on the other hand, you could argue it has a far bigger audience probably on Instagram. So there is that. But I miss that. But I miss that. But look, I can't pretend I'm rushing to the newsstand to buy any magazines. I mean, I don't buy any magazines. That is a fact. I just don't. It's all on my phone.
One of the other things I was really curious, Ben and I were both really curious about was, Vanity Fair for years really trafficked in its kind of impressive readership. That was something that obviously made it incredibly valuable to advertisers and to people who wanted to speak with you guys or give you guys access. I'm really curious, it seems like you have quite a successful Substack already, tens of thousands of subscribers. I'm curious if you can share with us who some of your most notable readers are.
God, I mean, I should go down. I wish I'd gone down my list, but I mean, I get surprised when someone like Anand Yanucci suddenly appears as a subscriber, or Peter Morgan, someone like that. I mean, there are a lot of people reading it who, in fact, I should go back and check. And the comments are really good, I have to say. I mean, I have really clever people writing, actually, and to the point that I think, wow, like, who are you? Can I have you to dinner? I'm actually thinking, I actually piloted the other day a Fresh Hell dining club because I was thinking, because I just was thinking, like, that's the human factor that I somewhat miss, but it's sort of fun to have people around, and maybe eventually, some subscribers, because some of them are so smart that I quite want to meet these guys.
And or just a last Substack question, are you thinking about sort of that you're building a business there?
Well, I actually got into this purely. It was the one time when a courtship really made, because I usually kind of decide what I'm going to do and then I just do it. But I was actually really persuaded into doing it by them. I mean, they kept coming to me, and actually it was really nice to be so wanted, if you know what I mean. It was actually, in the end, I just thought, you know what, I probably should. What's holding me back? I am actually quite sort of a slow and painstaking writer. I mean, I'm not someone who could I'm so jealous of Anand Giridharadas, because, I mean, my God, the guy, how does he have so many thoughts and he can pump them out? I'd love to be able to do that. I can't. And that's what I regret, that I can't do it enough when to get to these stories. But who knows? I might. I mean, if it grew enough, I could imagine sort of inviting sort of my community of these amazing subscribers, as I mentioned, to kind of perhaps join and be part of it. But I'm not looking to do that. Having done, I have such an almost antipathy at this point to sort of the idea of building a business, essentially.
Yeah.
The freedom of not having to have a payroll or or any kind of responsibility is very appealing. I don't know how you feel about it, Ben, but
I think Ben dreams of that. I can answer it for him.
I kind of like it, but I also had a Substack courtship and do occasionally look over the wall. Can you say how much money is it bringing in every month for you, if I may ask?
Well, I don't want to go into the actual figures, but certainly more than if I was writing a column for a newspaper. I mean, it's a decent amount of money, much more than I expected, to be honest. And and I have seen people making a lot of money. I think the thing is, it's about volume, I think. I mean, that's the only problem. It's like the more you do, the more you're sort of willing to kind of keep doing it, the more you bring in. I mean, obviously. And I just wish that I could sort of clone myself and write sort of maybe 3 times a week. And then I would be, renting a villa, in Sardinia this summer.
Yeah, maybe the next generation of ChatGPT can maybe, start generating Tina Brown columns.
Exactly right.
So I wanted to read you a quote from one of your more recent Substacks. With her unerring instinct for getting it wrong, Meghan has come out with a show about fake perfection, just when the zeitgeist has turned raucously against it. Trump's America is a foul-mouthed and disheveled cultural place where podcasters in sweaty t-shirts, crotch-rot jeans, and headphones achieve world domination on YouTube.
Oh God, I'm really sorry. I hope you're not wearing crotch rod jeans this morning, but you look very groomed, Ben.
I appreciate that. But honestly, that sounded a little self-hating. I mean, you're out there, like it sounded like you have some ambivalence about this form.
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, there's not much elegance out there, right? I mean, I wrote this week about how, for self-soothing now, I watch the debates in the House of Commons on whether or not to kill the Scunthorpe Steelworks. Because, oh my God, I watched it sort of for an hour. I found myself sucked into this thing because it was so kind of new and rare at the moment, just to see kind of very smart, substantial, educated people sort of having a very sort of civil argument about something, of importance to the country, and coming to actually the wrong decision, I think, but in the right way, and I miss that. I do. I mean, I'm so tired of like foul-mouthed Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I mean, there's just it's an uncouth culture we're living in right now, and I'm just old enough to remember the days when people did have a few manners, and I feel strongly about manners, actually. I mean, I wrote about that too, about Ronaldo Herrera, the sort of died recently. He was this big socialite in Manhattan, but he had these exquisite manners, and you had to ask yourself, like, what are manners for? Manners are actually there to protect the other person. It's not some kind of highfalutin, pretentious thing to have manners. The thing about manners is it stops the other person feeling like crap. It's like if you are sitting next to someone and you talk to them nicely, and then you talk to the other person, everybody feels included. I mean, it's not some old-fashioned etiquette thing. It's actually just making shy people who are not that, self-confident, feel better about themselves. Or write a thank you letter when someone has actually, killed themselves to put on a good evening. It can be an email, but it's like, I just do treasure people who have some manners, and I recognize the people who do, and And I have a fierce private hatred for those who don't.
So we have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with Tina Brown.
This week on our branded segment from Think with Google, I spoke with Google's VP of Marketing, Josh Spanier, about the state of play of AI in marketing. We've been talking for a while about AI's impact on marketing, and it's a space that's just constantly changing. Where's your head at right now? And how is the promise of AI in the marketing industry shaping up?
So we all remember Lord of the Rings, right? One ring to rule them all. The promise of AI when it first blew up from a marketing perspective was this notion of one AI to rule them all. That you would be able to push a button somehow, an AI button, and ideas would be generated, briefs would be written, ads would be created, media would be bought and placed, and then you'd get measurement and growth all happening through this sort of seamless, integrated one AI system to rule them all. The reality is, and something we've all come to realize, that fully integrated system, while it's a vision we all have, is still some years away from becoming an actual reality. And one of the learnings, one of the insights in the state of the AI marketing industry right now is find your biggest problems, find your greatest areas of opportunity, and deploy an AI solution which will solve that issue for you right now, while we build a whole series of AI rings to build that one AI solution in the future.
So what are the specific rings people ought to be using?
So there's lots of them. One I particularly like, and you've heard me talk about Gemini before. Gemini is Google's large language model, our foundational AI solution. Within Gemini, there's this feature called a gem, G-E-M, an AI agent. It takes 15 to 20 seconds to build a gem, a little bit longer if you want to make it more complex. And you can create these gems which will solve AI marketing problems for you in terms of writing a brief or sounding out ideas or generating new concepts. So these gems within Gemini are really helping speed up the process we do marketing. But beyond that, I think there is a hidden story around AI and marketing which hasn't been covered as much. And I'm going to go back to the car you drive. So 20 years ago, you drove a manual stick shift. Today, you rely on BMW or Ford or Audi's engineers to build Tiptronic 8-gear changing, gearboxes, smoother riding than you could ever drive yourself. That's what's happening in the world of AI under the hood inside of Google. When you look at Google's demand gen ad product, you look at YouTube's VRC ad products, when you look at Performance Max, we are building AI into these tools such that you just turn them on and you are now an AI marketer at scale. And that lifting of all boats, as it were, by the Google AI underneath is really driving a lot of AI adoption for marketers.
Where should people go to keep up with these trends and insights?
Head on over to thinkwithgoogle.com, where we're constantly publishing guides, research, and advice on using AI in marketing within the Google stack.
So the Meghan we were referring to in that quote that Ben read is, of course, Meghan Markle. And, that was from one of the columns that you wrote about her. I was just kind of curious if you could kind of bring us a little bit behind the scenes. I mean, what is the response that you get to writing about Meghan Markle? Obviously, she is, a subject of incredible fascination to us here. She has actually, despite the fact that a lot of people have kind of joked about her Netflix shows, and you wrote a pretty brutal takedown of it. And obviously she had the unsuccessful podcast, but now she actually, it seems like looking at the podcast charts, like her recent show about female CEOs is actually seemingly done kind of quite well. I'm curious what the response has been to your writing about Meghan, and just take us behind the scenes a little bit about what happens after you publish a column like that.
I mean, I get, a lot of response. I mean, it does very well. But I think anytime I write about the royals, it does do very well because it is kind of a bit one of my topics, because I wrote the Palace Papers. I mean, obviously there are Meghan lovers and Meghan haters. I mean, the Palace just doesn't really think about Meghan anymore. It's almost like she's gone. And I think the tragic aspect is Harry, I mean, the thing about Meghan is, she's really not bad at anything that she does. I mean, she has a huge kind of influencer following, if you like. It seems like, when she puts on, a shirt or whatever, or carries a handbag, it sells out, right? Which means that she clearly has a following of people who really like what she stands for in some ways. Her problem is just that she is so ADD. I mean, she just never stops making announcements. and never really sort of follows through. It's like, whoops, I'm going to be a cooking show. Nah, I'm going to be a podcast. And hello, I've got a beauty line. You know, I mean, it's like just do one of those things, do it really well, and then do something else. She's weirdly panic-stricken in her sort of business model in some way. Maybe she's just so devoid of self-confidence that she's always trying to be a sort of instant Beyonce or instant Michelle Obama without the sort of, the background essentially that has built those people, those kind of very, very strong structures on which they stand. So that's really been her problem. I think if she'd simply succeeded at one thing and then done another thing, I think she'd be in a much, much better place. But, she's enormously frankly, sort of shallow in her approach to the work she does.
Who do you get the sense is in her kind of inner circle? Who is advising her on kind of some of the moves that she's kind of been making?
Well, what I hear from everyone is that she's unadvisable, and that is the issue. She's had a lot of good people willing to give advice to her. But what has irritated the people who do, and big people who do, is that they sit with her and they give her very good advice, and she kind of appears to be extremely, motivated by it, and then she doesn't do it and does something completely else. She's sort of worn out her advisory, circle, essentially, who just feel like, well, what's the point? She's not going to do it. So she's very hard to advise, and unfortunately, she is the major advisor to Harry. So, I mean, she doesn't take advice and he only takes hers. So that's not a very good combination, really, for either of them.
And the other sort of, and maybe more significant, great royal mess of the recent generation. Yeah, I was really surprised by that piece you wrote recently, and I admit I'm not following this super closely, but suggesting that Prince Andrew, that his story requires a new inspection. And you wrote this great line, memo to Vanity Fair's respected departing editor, Radhika Jones. God, if you ever call me respected, that's brutal.
Well, I was trying to be courteous.
Blow out your last issue's budget, sending a super sleuth to Perth to report out the way the perplexing Virginia Giuffre's story is all about. Do you think that we're getting that the media has gotten the Epstein story wrong in some really significant way?
I don't think we got the Epstein story wrong. No, I mean, Epstein was a very sinister, a deeply sort of terrible person, I think, who I don't think we got Epstein wrong. But, I mean, it would just be ironic if, and I don't think we got the Andrew story wrong, too. I mean, Andrew is, one of the most, he has the worst judgment in the world. He's an idiot. He's kind of loathsome in 1,000 ways. It's just possible, though, that he wasn't lying about Virginia Giuffre. I mean, that's one of the things in life. It's like sometimes Trump tells the truth, but the thing is, he's a total liar. So why would you believe him? Sort of the same thing with Andrew. So I don't know. I do find I've always found the Giuffre story just interesting. I always wanted to kind of interview the husband. Like, the story was that if she left Epstein, she went to Australia and then she never came back because she met this guy. And I somehow, you never really learned the full surround. I just, the story might be exactly as she's portrayed it, but it was a strange thing to do, to post pictures of herself black and blue on Instagram saying, I have 4 days to live. And then it turned out that actually there hadn't been a bus crash of any particular sort of severity. And she's fine, it seems, so what's that about? Does that just mean that she's currently unwell, and has done this thing? Or is there another story there? I just think it deserves a good, full-bodied sort of blowout story.
Yeah, and there is something that instead of a great journalist going out to Perth for 3 months, you're going to get sleuths on Reddit with incomplete information and on TikTok getting to whatever conclusion they feel like. It is.
And well, that's what I miss. You see, and I miss it indeed in my own Substack, because there are times when I do have good instincts for stories, and so I'll kind of write them in that sort of, a column form, but longing to be able to have the extra, to have actually a couple of weeks to report it out, and then it will be so much stronger and so much better. But there isn't the time.
Yeah, that's something I notice about Airmail, Graydon Carter's publication. Sometimes is like, oh my God, this is a great assignment. If only it had 100 times the budget and amount of time. Right, exactly. Yeah. That is what we all miss. And I mean, I think that, frankly,
there is a way to do that. If I think, everybody decides to put their budget where they want to put it. And I definitely think budget with 2 or 3 really, really strong reporters, pays off hugely. Well, you did that very much at BuzzFeed. I mean, you broke so many good stories. I don't know how many reporters you had, but you had really good investigative reporters there, didn't you, in BuzzFeed?
Yeah, and we spent a lot of money on it that in the end we couldn't afford. I mean, it was
right. I know.
But so in this sort of new era, you called Radhika Jones respected, and they're hiring a new editor there. Who should they hire?
Did you look at the job posting for that? Job?
I did not.
Oh my God. The job posting, my husband wrote this book called Do I Make Myself Clear, where he would take like 3,000 words of corporate gobbledygook and get it down to like 3 sentences. This job posting, I mean, it is like 2,000 words of utter gibberish. So who wrote it? I don't know. But it's like they're advertising for a cyborg or something. I have no idea what they're advertising for. But this person is supposed to do so many different things. They have to think global and be local. They have to work across markets. They have to be brand specific. It's all of these words. I mean, there is no one who could possibly answer that job description. I mean, I think they need what they've always needed, which is an editor. I mean, first and foremost, an editor, not an editorial brand director, but an editor who understands great writers, where to find them and how to match them, which is what we're talking about, which is the critical thing, not just hiring writers, but knowing which writers to match to which stories. That's the critical thing. Has a really strong visual sense, a really strong news sense, able to work on a reduced budget, which is what it is now, and an ability to be something of an impresario for the magazine. I mean, those are the things that you need, essentially.
Yeah, that's a shorter description. Who do you think best fits that description if you're not available?
Well, I think they should have given it to Janice Min 7 years ago, because I think Janice is entrepreneurial in her outlook, and she's super smart and has never quite had the opportunity to do the deeper news stories. I mean, she's always been at Hollywood, but I think she's smarter than that. I don't think, though, anymore she would come. I think she's now got her own business, so I don't think she would do it.
Yeah, they probably have to acquire the Ankler in the process.
Well, indeed, and maybe should. And actually, what I thought they should have done is actually move the locus of Vanity Fair to LA and sort of lean into the LA piece of it, essentially, and make Janice the kind of head. But I think that will never happen in the current Condé Nast structure. That's what I think they could do. I mean, I started thinking about, like, could Ronan Farrow edit a magazine? I don't know. Probably not. Could Lauren Sanchez? Probably could, actually. But no, I mean, to be serious, I mean, I think David Haskell is a really good editor at New York Magazine. I think Mayor Rashan is a really, really good editor at, Hollywood Reporter. I mean, I think Mayor would like to do it probably. And I still think that Mayor, even though he's kind of slightly older school now, he has that hunger for story. He still loves magazines. You've got to still kind of love magazines. And he's pretty entrepreneurial, actually, in his outlook.
It does feel like David's New York has kind of replaced Vanity Fair in the culture a bit, hasn't it?
I must say I am really impressed at how he always comes up with something I want to read, And I mean, and of course, Jeffrey Goldberg, has really made The Atlantic a hot magazine. So, I mean, it is possible to still have a hot magazine, as we've seen. So Jeffrey, I don't think would want Vanity Fair, but he's I think, a superb editor. I mean, he just had the luckiest scoop in the world. But I mean, if Condé Nast came to Semaphore and said, okay, so we will acquire Semaphore, and fold it in, would you do Vanity Fair?
Oof. I mean, it's funny. I mean, I'm somebody who still gets, people are still upset at me at BuzzFeed for having opposed our acquisition by Disney. I mean, the notion of being folded in, that just sounds so, like, uncomfortable physically to be folded into a thing. And the Condé's approach to these, what do they call them now? Brands, right? That they're all matrixed and global and cross this and cross that. It is very, very grim.
It is.
That said, there's no reason you couldn't say, actually, this job should be fun and this should be one of those fun jobs where you get to do cool stuff and assign great stories.
I think it is a fun job. I think people who say, oh, does anybody want it? Of course they do. I mean, when you think about, like, how there are so many talented, sort of small, nuanced, niched things that are out there full of talent. I mean, you're telling me that none of those people would rather have a budget that is certainly 3 times bigger than that, and a brand that everybody will answer the phone for, and the ability to assign some really good and cultivate and grow some really good writers. I mean, of course, it's a wonderful job for a younger person, but not someone, I suppose, who's already moved on to cross the Rubicon.
Now that you're in this this Substack ecosystem, I think one of the things you were always great at was spotting rising talent. Is there stuff you're reading in particular, stuff you're seeing that you'd recommend and that you think is kind of has whatever is next in it?
Well, I mean, I'm a fan of Sean McCreish, but he's already been sort of spotted and taken to the New York Times. Very talented young British journalist called Harry Lambert, who I spotted in the New Statesman, who's really good. He left, and I think came here briefly, and then he went back again. But I thought he really had something good. I think Jessica Tester's pretty good, actually, in the New York Times, sort of young. My daughter's really good, but she's not a journalist. I wish she would be. She's a documentarian, which is what people do now because they haven't got magazines. If she was in my day, she'd have had a magazine by now.
And maybe that's the answer, right? These documentaries are now what drives the zeitgeist, and so a big doc on Netflix is what a magazine used to be.
Well, exactly. I think the docs have taken over that role, the narrative role. What is a pity, though, is that now the documentarians are being totally squeezed with budgets. They cut all that, alas. But yeah, I think that's where a lot of the narrative talent went was documentaries.
So I remember it. I mean, I've heard this story a lot of times, and I remember hearing it at Harry's memorial about you and him every morning. After when you were at times in your life when you did not, in fact, have armies of reporters to assign, waking up and assigning stories anyway to sort of your imaginary troops. In this, bananas moment that we're in right now, what should we be writing? Can you assign some stories? What when you woke up this morning, what were you assigning in your mind, in your imagination?
I'm kind of fascinated by this edict that went out to the law firms that they have to give all this money to these Trump causes. Like, what's that? Like, what causes are they? I mean, they're not by any chance the Trump Foundation, are they? I mean, like, what is happening with that? So that really interests me. I really want to read a big fat story, a real blowout takedown of Howard Lutnick. I just think,
oh, that's a great idea.
Now, I haven't seen that. Like, who are these people? It's like, I heard that, this could be completely apocryphal, and perhaps I shouldn't even say it because I could be sued or you could be sued. Just that I had heard he landed a private plane at his son's camp, when it was parents visiting day. But
amazing.
That could be wrong, and I'm not.
Well, you heard that somebody had done that. Perhaps
it's a podcast. You can say anything on here.
No, you can't.
No, you can't.
No, you can't. You can't. But I did hear that. But also this guy Bukele, this president of El Salvador, who sort of sits there looking like a kind of something out of Regine's nightclub in sort of in 1998 with his like.
It was crazy. The outfit was insane.
I wanted to just know what aftershave he was wearing because I just know that it was like permeated the Oval Office. But he suddenly appears, and he's in the mix now. So who is he? And I couldn't find any really good pieces about, like, who is Bukele? Like, is he...
There's a great story in The New Yorker about this, your alma mater.
Okay, missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Was it this last week?
No, but this was actually pre-Trump. But yes, maybe it's due for a renewal.
Definitely. I would say to them, refresh and repost.
But just the question, where do these men come from, right?
Where do they come from?
All these new men.
All these new men. I mean, suddenly we have an entire new world order where these kind of, kind of Gambino people, who I don't know who they are, but they're suddenly there sitting in the Oval Office being entertained. Meanwhile, Zelensky, the war hero, is being kind of kicked to the curb and shown the door. It's a really... So I think there are so many good profiles to be done. I think that, if you had a newspaper, you'd really want to have twice a week, just a huge page of how the British newspapers used to do Man of the Week or something. And you want that great piece about Lutnick and Bukele and this guy Navarro, who's So you're getting it in bits, you get it in bits, and you do, and some people are doing it. I mean, I can't, read everything. I'm sure people are sitting there sneering and thinking, oh my God, she didn't see that huge piece in wherever, Puck last week that did exactly that. But that's part of the problem, isn't it? Is that a lot of it doesn't land because you can't find it.
Well, and also it is like I wish I could send somebody out to report for 3 months, but that's not sort of in our model. It's not in the sort of economics of a lot of news these days, just to dispatch Max down a rabbit hole for 3 months without writing anything or even being sure he'll bring anything back. But it's right. I'm just thinking about these people you talk about. I mean, if you look back to the 90s, like Peter Navarro was a failed 4-time Democratic candidate for office in San Diego. Bukele was, I suppose, working at his family's Yamaha dealership, and they were sold motorcycles in San Salvador, right? These were such sort of marginal people who made their way to the center.
Well, I think the rise of the randos
Yeah.
is the series. What you
now
really
we're talking. Yes, that's
now
great.
the rise of the because. I mean, I loved one of the things I liked in Michael Wolff's new book. I sometimes don't like his books, but I did actually like the new book because I loved learning about Natalie Harp. Who runs behind the golf cart, with the printer for Trump. I mean, how does she? I mean, it's like how, why, and indeed, Carolyn Levitt. It's like she's just sort of exploded into our lives, and there she is. And I mean, she is. You've got to hand it to her. She is pretty self-confident, age 27, to be able to face the sort of the press as she does. But where does this self-confidence come from? It's really amazing to see. So I'm fascinated by all these people, absolutely fascinated. They are a carnival of copy.
I do, Michael's book totally embodies that because, right, the two main characters are not Trump, who's mostly off stage. It's Boris Epshteyn, this sort of big kind of, overbearing lawyer, and then Natalie, and it's almost, yes, you could sort of produce it as sort of some kind of comic opera or something. It's comic opera.
And is Boris still out there hanging out? I mean, is he there?
Boris is doing great, yeah.
Yeah.
He's thriving. Yeah.
I mean, you saw it a bit in that last press conference when you saw that the horrendous circle of like Pam Bondi and Stephen Miller, who were all in the Bukele conference. And I mean, it's such a kind of fascinating cast of clowns, essentially, but they're very powerful.
Yeah, and it's definitely people who were genuinely kind of marginalized. Miller was marginalized and mocked, and I think resented that. I mean, it's an interesting. These are great stories.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Well, you know what? If nobody else will do them, we'll look forward to reading your takes about them and your excellent writing. You really do still. The Substack is so vivid and fun, and we just had a great time reading it. So,
and I love Semaphore. I mean, I wish I could come to your big summit next week, but I'm actually got to go to this literary gala that I accepted doing. Otherwise, I would be there. But it's a fantastic lineup.
I hope listeners will join us down at the World Economy Summit in Washington. Yes. Thank you for the plug.
We got a nice little plug in there. That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tina.
All right.
That was such a fun conversation. Obviously, Tina, one of the great media personalities. I mean, what did you think? What did you think of what she had to say about her kind of the transition from this kind of very centralized, top-down information magazine ecosystem to the kind of like anything goes? She's scrapping it with the rest of us, Substack driven media world that we're in now.
I mean, the thing about her, and this is, as you know, the sort of how I'm wired too. She just cares about stories, right? I mean, I do think that in this world of, and as she said, this sort of corporate gobbledygook about content, like obviously part of the job of an editor, and I look at budgets and I worry about that kind of stuff, but ultimately, like, are you assigning good stories? Are these stories going to pop? And is this something interesting? Is this a question that you're trying to answer? And I think both, she has that more than like anyone else I've ever met, right? That conversation at the end, where by the end of it, she's just totally nailed this new group of profiles that we're going to assign, and like
totally,
and I do think but then, right? Like the question is, I do want to send somebody to Perth. Like, you know how expensive it is to fly to Perth?
Yeah.
But it is like, there is this thing of money. And when you read these memoirs now of like, because Graydon just had a memoir out, like about, there was a writer of his who talked about having Brian Burroughs, about having made $500,000 in a year from 3 stories before travel and expenses.
Insane.
I mean, that money, but it wasn't just being, spent on lobster in the office. Like, they were putting just enormous amounts of time and of great writers' time into these really big, hard, complex targets. And that's missing now.
Well, I think the thing that's changed beyond the kind of the big assigned stories is this thing that we also touched on at the end, which is actually a lot of the information is out there, and it's been reported in pieces, or it's been talked about on Reddit, or somebody has tweeted it, or they posted the subjects have posted it themselves, or something like that. But there is so much information, and there is so much that's being churned out both by professional media organizations, subjects themselves, and amateurs who are just kind of interested on the internet, that there is less of a way of directing all of that information into kind of one central place, which used to take the form of just like the definitive piece on X person, right?
I wonder if that's true though. Like, don't you think? I actually think that amid that chaos, like maybe we're being like overly dissuaded by like, oh my God, this isn't really a scoop because
it's out there.
Because like Bob 4473 posted it on Reddit 6 years ago. Maybe it's maybe I actually think that we are overly reactive that and probably ought to do more. We ought to attempt more to synthesize and be definitive in a world where people are so overwhelmed and disoriented.
I think that that's true, but at the same time, I really do feel, I really do feel like there's just like amazing things being written every day. Like let's take, we're recording this on Wednesday. There's this great piece out about Elon Musk in the Journal, and his kind of quest to have a lot of children, and it's a fascinating piece. And obviously, it'll be something that people will cite and people are paying attention to and talking today. And yet, my parents probably aren't seeing it. It's probably not truly percolating out, into the real world too much. But obviously, it's amazing reporting, and they actually threw real kind of bodies at it, and I'm sure some of that information will make its way into kind of other pieces in the future. But it's going to be subsumed by this other entire wave of whatever news and information is kind of pumped out there today, and the thousands of podcast content that's created, and information created by legitimate news organizations, and fun social content that people are posting. I just feel like it's harder for news and reporting to compete when there's just like more stuff that you can consume. That's my feeling on it, though.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think Emma Tucker's journal probably is the place trying hardest to do this stuff and hitting hardest with it.
Totally.
And I think also not seeing the kind of returns that the Murdochs had hoped for in terms of subscriptions for what is just spectacular, fun reporting. I think Dana Mattioli, who did that story, had like 2 stories like that, the day we're recording it, Wednesday the 16th. But yeah, no, it's but I don't know. I found this honestly a little like inspiring to go out and like assign some bigger swings. Although not about the Royals. When Tina writes about them, I'll read it because I'll read anything she writes. But it is I just lack that gene. And actually, when I was at BuzzFeed, I tried to run it as sort of a Republican, like small R Republican publication that didn't care about the had a traditional American anti-monarchist view, but it turns out that I was just overruled by like the internet, which is obsessed with and loves the royals, and I suppose maybe now we kind of, in the form of the Trump family, have our own royals to obsess about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that is going to be it for us today. Thank you so much for listening to Mixed Signals from Semaphore Media. Our show, as always, is produced by Sheena Ozaki, with special thanks to Max Toomey, Britta Galanis, Chad Lewis, Rachel Oppenheim, Anna Pizzino, Garrett Wiley, Jules Zern, and Tori Kaur. Our engineer is Rick Kwan, and our theme music is by Billy Libby. Our public editor this week is, of course, Tina Brown. I mean, who else?
Who else? And if you like Mixed Signals, please follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to review us.
And if you want more, you can always sign up for Semaphore's media newsletter, out every Sunday night.